Welcome to the Human History Channel. In this episode, we will dive into the story of the oldest civilization on our planet, learn about its triumphs, knowledge, and achievements that have survived to our days. Magnificent temples, ziggurats, and rich, and just or, on the contrary, greedy rulers will amaze your imagination. We will understand the reasons for the decline of this great ancient world, and learn about the outstanding people of that time who left their mark on history. Mesopotamia, land between two rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, located in the territory of modern Iraq and partially Syria, Iran, and Turkey, has long been considered the cradle of civilization. This is not just a geographical name, but a designation of a unique interaction between humans and the environment, which gave rise to some of the first complex social structures, state institutions, and systems of knowledge in human history. The civilization that originated here back in the Neolithic period reached its peak in the 3rd and 2nd millennia before our era with the emergence of great cultures: Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria. Its history is a narrative about how humans, faced with difficult natural conditions, invented new forms of organization, thinking, and creativity that laid the foundation for future world cultures. It all began with a slow but inexorable transformation of the landscape. Back in the 7th to 5th millennia before our era, tidal currents in the lower part of the Persian Gulf allowed easy irrigation of fields with short canals, which contributed to the formation of the first rural communities, such as Ubaid. In those times, the economy was relatively simple, and the land generously yielded harvests. However, gradually the rivers saturated the valley with silt. The tidal waters receded, and a serious threat of drought arose. This ecological and economic crisis became a powerful stimulus for uniting efforts and creating large-scale engineering solutions. It was the necessity to combat floods and provide water to arid fields that led to the emergence of the first centers of management and coordination, the beginnings of future cities. Already in the Uruk period, the difference between the lives of rulers and ordinary people became striking. In Uruk, archaeologists discovered the so-called Quarter of Red Buildings, an ensemble of several two-story houses with thick walls, inner courtyards, separate rooms for receiving guests, and even primitive sewer drains. They sharply contrasted with the one-story mud brick huts of artisans and peasants. Later, in in the royal tombs dating back to the 26th century before our era, 74 human skeletons were found: servants, musicians, charioteers, killed to accompany the king to the afterlife. The tombs themselves contained golden helmets, diadems made of sheet gold with leaf-shaped pendants, earrings of lapis lazuli and gold weighing up to 200 grams, musical instruments inlaid with shell and lapis lazuli. This was not just wealth, it was a demonstration of absolute power, where even the lives of subjects were part of the royal property. When the first cities were just emerging, their appearance was far from monumental. Streets, laid out as the settlement grew, were narrow, winding like a labyrinth, partly due to natural development, partly for protection from the scorching sun and winds. Houses were built from sun-dried brick, usually two-story, with an inner courtyard where food was prepared, water was stored in clay jars, and dates were dried. On the first floor were utility rooms and bedrooms for women and children. On the second, the male half and a living room for receiving guests. The entrance was traditionally made not from the street, but from a side blank wall, so outsiders did not see the courtyard, and, according to ancient belief, the spirit of the house did not go out into the wind. City walls served not only as protection from enemies, but also as dams during floods, and their wide upper platforms were used as drying areas for grain and harvest. In Ur and Nippur, archaeologists discovered houses with primitive toilets and clay drain pipes connected to a common sewer main, an amazingly early example of urban infrastructure, where concern for hygiene coexisted with religious piety. By the beginning of the third millennium before our era, the first city-states arose: Uruk, Ur, Lagash. Uruk probably became the first city in history, reaching a population of 40 to 80,000 people by 2,800 years before our era, within 6-mile protective walls. Each of these cities became an independent political unit, surrounded by a belt of dependent villages and united around the temple of its patron god. At the center of the city rose a temple complex, not just a sanctuary, but an economic, administrative, and storage hub. It was here that all economic life was concentrated. The harvest from the fields was collected in temple granaries, distributed among the population, processed in craft workshops, and officials kept strict records of livestock, grain, and goods. This system of management, born from the need for irrigation, gradually acquired a complex bureaucratic structure. This system would have been impossible without special people, scribes. They were trained in schools called Edubba, meaning house of tablets, usually attached to temples. Training began in childhood and lasted years. Students sat on reed mats, armed with reed style and scraps of clay, on which they copied lists of words, Sumerian proverbs, and mythological texts to exhaustion. Their drafts have come down to us with teachers' notes. Poorly written: "You are lazy like a donkey. Study, or you will be a shepherd." Errors were not corrected, they simply tapped over the wrong sign, making the tablet bumpy. Upon completing training, the graduate became a dubsar, one who holds the stylus, and began a career in the chancellery, temple, or court. Without these people, tired, strict, able to turn sound into sign, there would be no laws, no contracts, no even cattle censuses. They were the nervous system of the entire civilization. In the same period, in the middle of the third millennium before our era, one of the first known social reformers in history appeared in the city of Lagash, the ruler Uruk-hai-Gina. He faced corruption and abuses by officials known as mashkim, who imposed excessive taxes and duties on the population. Uruk-hai-Gina abolished these extortions, restored the rights of temples, and declared the protection of orphans and widows. His reforms, recorded in cuneiform documents, became the first attempt to establish a more just order and limit the arbitrariness of officials, thereby laying the foundations of legal consciousness. It is indicative that in one of Uruk-hai-Gina's decrees it is said, "Previously the mashkim took a sheep for funerals, now he does not take a sheep. Previously the mashkim took provisions for funerals, now he does not take." This testifies not only to abuses, but also to the fact that corruption became systemic. Officials turned the ritual of mourning into a source of personal enrichment. Uruk-hai-Gina, on the contrary, advocated modesty and justice. He did not erect grandiose monuments to himself, but returned property to temples, including livestock, lands, and even slave artisans. His reign is a rare example of ascetic responsibility in an era of growing monarchical luxury. Already at this time, the beginnings of international law emerged. The earliest surviving interstate treaty was concluded between Enatum, the ruler of Lagash, and the king of neighboring Umma, around 2,500 years before our era. The treaty, carved on stone, defined the border between the cities and was sealed with an oath before the god Shamash. Violation equaled blasphemy. This was not just a treaty about land, but the establishment of a peaceful order, recognition of each other's sovereignty in exchange for stability. Thus diplomacy was born as an alternative to war. Soon after, around 2112 years before our era, Ur-Nammu, the founder of the third dynasty of Ur, entered the scene. This was a period of recovery after the barbaric invasion of the Gutians, and Ur-Nammu sought to recreate order and justice. In gratitude to the gods for victory and the liberation of cities, he undertook a large-scale program of construction and reforms. One of his greatest achievements was the Code of Ur-Nammu, the earliest surviving written legislative code in human history. Unlike later harsh norms, it was based on the principle of monetary compensation. For the loss of an eye, for example, half a mina of silver was due, not taking an eye from the offender. In the prologue to the code, Ur-Nammu declared, "I did not hand over orphans and widows to the powerful. I established justice in the land." Thus, the law became not only an instrument of punishment, but also a symbol of the ruler's care for the weak and vulnerable, as well as a powerful means of legitimizing his power. And yet, Ur-Nammu remained a king of his era. His tomb in Ur, although looted in antiquity, was surrounded by the remains of buried servants, and the walls preserved traces of paintings with images of lions and eagles, symbols of royal power. Unlike Urukagina, he actively used architecture for self-glorification. Every ziggurat he built was not only a sacrifice to the gods, but also an eternal reminder of his name. This combination of justice and demonstrative power became the norm for subsequent rulers. In the same time, the era of great architectural structures, ziggurats, began. Back in the Ubaid era, temples were built on artificial elevations, but by the Uruk period, around 3,500 years before our era, these mounds turned into multi-level terrace structures, ziggurats. They became an integral part of any Mesopotamian city. They were built from sun-dried clay bricks, covered on the outside with a layer of baked bricks, and bonded with bitumen, a natural resin that served as an excellent waterproof binder. Engineers thought through every detail. Openings were left in the cladding for draining moisture from the inner core, and drainage systems for rainwater runoff were arranged on the terraces. Each ziggurat had the shape of a stepped pyramid with a rectangular, square, or oval base. Ascent to the top was made by external stairs or spirals, and only priests had access there. At the top was a small temple, the house of the god, where he descended from heaven to dwell among people. In addition to ziggurats, engineering thought sought solutions at the level of everyday life. One of the most important inventions was the shaduf, a device for lifting water. A long pole on a stand, with a bucket on one end and a clay vessel filled with sand on the other. Simple but ingenious. One woman could lift up to 300 buckets of water from a canal to the field in an hour. The wheel appeared later. The earliest depictions of wheeled carts are found on the Standard of Ur, dating back to 2,600 years before our era. Before that, loads were carried on sledges along specially tamped clay roads. The first wheels were solid, made of 3 glued boards. Hollow ones with spokes appeared only at the beginning of the second millennium, before our era, and the Mesopotamians also learned to melt quartz sand with alkali, obtaining bright blue and green glass for beads and amulets, and glazed tiles, with relief images of dragons and sacred bulls, already under Nebuchadnezzar II, adorned the gates of Babylon and became the prototype of Persian and Islamic decorative tradition. Art served not decoration, but power. On the Standard of Ur, 2 sides, war and peace, show the ideal cycle of the royal mission. Victory ensures order, abundance. The size of the figures emphasized hierarchy. The king is twice as tall as the warriors, the gods even larger. Thus the cosmic order mesh, for which every ruler fought, was visually affirmed. Later in Babylon, the dragon Mushasu appeared on the Ishtar gate with the head of a snake, the body of a lion, and the tail of a scorpion, the sacred animal of Marduk. Its images did not just decorate the walls. It was believed that the dragon magically repelled chaos and enemies, making the city impregnable. Art was the shield and voice of the state. The ziggurat was a dual symbol. On one hand, the axis of the world, connecting heaven and earth, and on the other, the heart of urban economy. The entire temple complex around it functioned as a giant household. Grain and oil were stored here. Blacksmiths, potters, and weavers worked. Artisans and officials lived. Taxes collected from the population went here and were then distributed according to the city's needs. Thus, the ziggurat united divine, economic, and political power. Ur-Nammu, as a true builder, erected ziggurats not only in Ur, but also in Nippur, Uruk, and Eridu. Their visibility from afar constantly reminded residents and travelers of the presence of the god and the ruler's power. Royal palaces grew along with the cities. In Mary, on the Middle Euphrates, a palace covering more than 2 hectares was excavated, a whole city within a city. It included more than 250 rooms, a throne hall with frescoes, the only ones in Mesopotamia, an archive with 20,000 tablets, kitchens, bathrooms with hot water, a library, and even special rooms for the royal wives and concubines. Floors were laid with tiles, walls decorated with paintings of sacred trees and warriors. In one of the archives, a letter from Queen Shibtu was found. She complains to her husband king that she is given too little oil for the body and too little fabric for dresses. Even in correspondence, the voice of a person accustomed to comfort and luxury sounds. But temples were not only warehouses and offices, they were centers of spiritual experience, where sound played as important a role as the word. In the royal tombs of Ur, golden lyres with heads of sacred bulls, inlaid with lapis lazuli and shell, were found. These were not decorations, but tools for divine dialogue. It was believed that music is a language understandable to the gods. Priests sang hymns accompanied by lyres and drums, and the words of these hymns were recorded in special musical notation, in the earliest examples of musical notation in the world. Modern researchers have deciphered the melody of one of them, the hymn to Ninkasi, the goddess of beer, and reproduced it. The rhythm is slow, almost hypnotic, as if created for immersion in another state of consciousness, where a person could hear the voice of the goddess. Gradually, along with the construction of cities, writing developed. Cuneiform arose around 3,500 years before our era in Uruk as a means of accounting. The first tablets recorded the number of sheep, measures of grain, or areas of land. Writing was not an abstract art, but a practical tool of management. Over time, it began to serve for recording laws, astronomical observations, mathematical calculations, and finally, great literary works. And it is thanks to writing that Mesopotamia was able to preserve and pass on to descendants not only facts, but also its thoughts, dreams, and fears. Mathematics and astronomy in Mesopotamia reached astonishing maturity. The Sumerians developed a sexagesimal number system, which still determines how we divide an hour into 60 minutes, and a circle into 360 degrees. On a clay tablet known as Plimpton 322, and dating back to about 1,800 years before our era, there are 15 Pythagorean triples, integer solutions to the equation a squared plus b squared equals c squared, including very large numbers. This indicates that Mesopotamian mathematicians not only selected solutions, but understood the general rule for constructing them 1,000 years before Pythagoras. They could solve quadratic and cubic equations, calculate areas and volumes, and used tables to simplify calculations. Their methods were more procedural than demonstrative, but extremely effective. Astronomy was closely linked to time management, and thus to power. The year was divided into 12 lunar months, but since the lunar year is shorter than the solar one, every 2 to 3 years an additional 13th month was inserted, so that the spring festival Akkad, New Year, and the flooding of rivers always fell on the same astronomical event. The decision to insert was made by the king on the advice of priests. By controlling the calendar, power controlled sowing, tax collection, and rituals. The day was divided into 12 daytime and 12 nighttime hours, the length of which changed with the seasons, hence our uneven division of the day in antiquity. And the Mesopotamians were the first to introduce the 7-day week. 28 days of the lunar cycle, divided into 4 phases, gave 7 days. On every 7th day, Umunubu, day of not doing, it was forbidden to start important affairs. This was the prototype of the weekend, based not on religion, but on observation of nature. Astronomy developed under the influence of religion and practical necessity. Observations of the sky were conducted from deep antiquity, but by the first half of the first millennium before our era, they acquired a systematic character. Astronomers kept detailed diaries, recording the positions of planets, eclipses of the moon and sun, risings and settings of stars. They compiled catalogs such as Mulapin, in which they grouped stars into constellations and predicted the time of their appearance. And in an even more astonishing breakthrough, between 350 and 50 years before our era, Babylonian scholars began to apply geometry to calculate the movement of planets. In particular, they calculated the path of Jupiter, plotting a graph of the change in its speed over time and calculating the area of the trapezoid under this graph, a method that European scholars would discover only in the 14th century. Thus, abstract mathematics became a tool for understanding the cosmos. In the same time, at the end of the 3rd, beginning of the 2nd millennium before our era, one of the oldest literary epics in the world was formed in Sumer, the Epic of Gilgamesh. Initially, this cycle existed in oral form, but later it was recorded in cuneiform. And by the 12th century before our era, it took shape in a complete Akkadian version. Gilgamesh, a demigod and king of Uruk, experiences the death of his friend Enkidu and, in horror of his own mortality, sets out in search of immortality. He finds the herb of eternal life but loses it, and in the end returns to Uruk with a bitter but wise understanding. There is no immortality for humans. However, humans can achieve eternal memory. And in the epic's finale, Gilgamesh proudly shows the walls of Uruk, his greatest creation. This ending is not despair, but an affirmation of meaning. In creating a city, in building roads, canals, temples, in writing laws and songs, humans leave behind a legacy that will outlive their body. This is a deep philosophy permeating the entire Mesopotamian culture. This culture knew female voices, not as background but as power. Among thousands of cuneiform names, one stands out: Enheduanna, daughter of Sargon of Akkad, appointed by him as High Priestess of the Moon in Ur. She is the first author in world history whose name is known with certainty. She is credited with a cycle of hymns to the goddess Inanna, full of passionate lyricism and personal drama. In one of them, she describes how she was expelled from the temple, deprived of positions and adornments, and how she prayed to Inanna for restoration of her position. Her words are not template formulas, but the living speech of a woman who experienced fall and rebirth. I, Enheduanna, proclaim your glory, but I was overthrown, my power taken away. Restore me, O Inanna. Her existence proves, women could hold the highest religious and intellectual posts. Another example is Shoshanu, a female merchant from Mary, who managed caravans and concluded deals for thousands of shekels of silver. She even went to court over inheritance disputes and won. Legal literacy and economic activity of women were not exceptions, but part of normal life. The economy of the civilization was two-tiered. At its base was agriculture, impossible without artificial irrigation. In southern Mesopotamia, where there is almost no rain, main canals were diverted from rivers, from them, secondary ones, and from those, small branches to fields. Archaeologists have counted more than 200 large canals feeding thousands of farms. Managing this network required annual coordination. In spring, water release; in summer, distribution; in autumn, cleaning from silt. Violation of rules was punished severely. The main crops were barley and date palms. Wheat did not grow here due to soil salinization. From barley, beer was brewed and bread baked, the main products of the diet and the most important items of accounting. Beer was not just a drink, it was currency, ritual, and the right to life. Workers building ziggurats and canals received wages not in silver, but in beer and bread. The standard ration was 60 liters of beer and 1.5 kilograms of bread per month. In cuneiform tablets, norms were strictly fixed. To a mason, 2 measures; to a day laborer, 1 measure. Beer was brewed in huge cauldrons, and production was usually supervised by women. The profession of brewer was considered honorable and even sacred. The goddess Ninkasi was the patroness not only of beer, but also of poetry and joy. Her hymn is one of the oldest beer recipes in the world, where the brewing process is described as a loving act. You, Ninkasi, scoop the malt with water from the jug. You fill the barrels like the Tigris River. In temples, beer was poured as a sacrifice to the gods, and to the dead in graves, believing it would give them strength in the afterlife. No celebration, no deal went without beer. To seal a contract, parties drank from 1 jug. Beer was the glue of society. Based on agriculture, crafts developed. In cities, workshops for processing copper and bronze, smelting glass, making ceramics and fabrics operated. Archaeological finds, the standard of golden lyres from royal tombs, ornaments of lapis lazuli in gold, testify to the highest level of craftsmanship. Many artisans were attached to temples or the palace. They received a plot of land and a ration in exchange for labor. Women worked in state textile factories, mills, and breweries, playing an important role in the economy. But Mesopotamia acutely needed resources it lacked: timber, stone, metals. This pushed it toward active international trade. Copper quarries were in Oman, the country of Magan; silver and tin were mined in Anatolia; cedar was brought from the Levant, and the most valuable commodity, lapis lazuli, came from distant Afghanistan along the so-called lapis lazuli route. Trade was conducted both by sea, through the Persian Gulf with the island of Dilmun, Bahrain, where paths from the Indus Valley intersected, and by caravan trails. Merchants transported fabrics, oil, grain, and received raw materials for crafts and construction in return. This global network not only supplied the city with materials, but also brought new ideas, technologies, and cultural influences. Connections went deeper than simple exchange of goods. Contacts with Egypt began back in the era of the early kingdom, around 2,600 years before our era. In the tomb of Pharaoh Horaha, cylindrical seals from Mesopotamia were found, and in Uruk, statuettes in Egyptian style. The influence was probably mutual. The idea of a god-king ruling on behalf of heaven, almost certainly inspired the Egyptian concept of the pharaoh as the son of the god Ra. Even the depiction of the king striking an enemy with a club on the steel of the vultures from Lagash has a direct analog in the Egyptian Narmer palette. Even more astonishing are the connections with the Indus civilization. On Dilmun, a seal from Mohenjo-Daro with Indus hieroglyphs and an image of a bull was found, and next to it a Mesopotamian tablet. Goods from Meluha, 10 bags of carnelian. In beads of Indian carnelian. In Mohenjo-Daro, weights identical to Mesopotamian ones. This proves the existence of a single economic zone from the Indus to the Euphrates, without a single coin but with uniform standards. Notably, despite close contacts, writings never mixed. The two civilizations spoke different languages of the universe. The social structure of society was strictly hierarchical. At the top was the king, considered the god's viceroy on earth, followed by priests, military leaders, and officials. The basis of the population was free peasants and artisans. Slavery was widespread, but did not have such a harsh character as in some other ancient societies. Slaves could have families, property, engage in crafts, and even give testimony in court. Women were formally subordinate to men, but had the right to own property, conduct business, and go to court. Some women, especially high priestesses, possessed enormous influence and wealth. With the advent of Sargon of Akkad, around 2,334 years before our era, the very nature of war changed. Before him, armies were formed as militias. Peasants took spears for the duration of the conflict. Sargon created the first permanent professional army in history: personal guard, mercenaries, a unified supply system, and even military diplomats sent with ultimatums. This was not a spontaneous force, but a controlled machine. Later, at the beginning of the second millennium before our era, a chariot breakthrough occurred. Light two-wheeled carts with spokes, harnessed to a pair of horses, carried a warrior with a bow and a driver. This was the shock force of the era, like tanks in the 20th century. Such chariots became the basis of armies under Nebuchadnezzar II, among the Hittites and Egyptians, and in the archives of Mary, orders with clear norms were found. If a warrior throws down his shield and hides, his house will be burned, his wife given into slavery. Discipline was not an oral tradition, but a written law. War became a matter of calculation, logistics, and management. The rulers of Akkad and Babylon continued the tradition of demonstrative luxury. At the court of Hammurabi, there was a whole hierarchy of courtiers, from the chief cook responsible for 36 dishes a day to the head of the wardrobe managing hundreds of fabrics. Archives mention gifts to allied kings: 10 talents of silver, 20 measures of oil, 50 dresses of Babylonian wool. Luxury was not a whim, but a tool of politics, diplomatic influence, and internal prestige. However, justice also required symbolism. At the top of Hammurabi's law is depicted not the warrior king, but the king as a submissive servant of the god Shamash, receiving from his hands a staff, a sign not of power, but of responsibility. Religion permeated the entire life of the Mesopotamians. They believed in a multitude of gods, each of whom had a human nature, feelings, needs, character. Gods needed food, drink, clothing, and a house on earth, a temple where their statue stood, considered not an image but the real presence of the deity. People, according to their beliefs, were created precisely to serve the gods and maintain cosmic order. Relations with deities were built through rituals, sacrifices, and divinations. For example, reading the entrails of animals to predict the future. A special place in religious life was occupied by the temples of the healer goddess Gila. Here, in Isin and other cities, prayers, incantations, and practical medicine were combined. doctors used plant, animal, and mineral remedies, treated injuries and diseases, assisted in childbirth. Medicine had not yet separated from magic and faith, but already possessed its own system of knowledge and practices. Ideas about the afterlife were quite gloomy. After death, the soul went to the underground kingdom, a dark, dusty place where it eternally dragged out a miserable existence. However, death did not mean complete disappearance. Relatives performed the kispum ritual, a memorial meal, bringing food and drink for the dead. It was believed that the souls of ancestors became guardian spirits who continued to care for the family and required respect and support. Thus, the connection of generations was preserved even beyond life. Over time, the political center shifted. After the flourishing of Ur and Lagash in the 3rd millennium before our era, the era of Akkad came, the first imperial state in the world, founded by Sargon. Then, at the beginning of the 2nd millennium before our era, Babylon rose. In 1758 years before our era, its king Hammurabi united almost all of Mesopotamia under his rule and created the famous Code of Hammurabi, the most complete and well-known legislative code of antiquity. Unlike the Code of Ur-Nammu, it was based on the strict principle of an eye for an eye, but at the same time carefully regulated all spheres of life, from theft to marital relations, from hiring workers to treating the sick. The laws are carved on a basalt stele, topped with a scene where the sun god Shamash hands the king a staff and ring, symbols of power and justice. This code became not just a collection of laws, but also an ideological manifesto. Hammurabi appeared as a just ruler who restored order after chaos. Diplomacy reached refined maturity in the Amarna era, 14th century before our era, when Babylon corresponded with the pharaoh, the king of the Hittite kingdom, and the rulers of Cyprus. Letters were conducted in Akkadian, the international language of diplomacy of that time, and sent by couriers under guard. They discussed not only wars, but also dynastic marriages. One Babylonian queen, widowed, wrote to Pharaoh Tutankhamun proposing to marry his son, and strictly demanded to send a golden statue in full height to confirm the seriousness of intentions. Such negotiations were conducted for months, without wars, only with words, gifts, and mutual respect for sovereignty. In the same time, an important shift occurred in religious life. The Babylonian epic, Enuma Elish, told how the god Marduk defeated the primordial chaos in the form of the monster Tiamat, cleaved her body, creating heaven and earth from it, and was proclaimed the supreme god of the pantheon. This myth reflected political reality. Babylon became the capital of the empire, and its god the head of all gods. In honor of Marduk, the grand ziggurat Edimenenki, temple of the foundation of heaven and earth, was erected in Babylon, which later became the prototype of the biblical Tower of Babel. Its last, 7-tier reconstruction was carried out by King Nebuchadnezzar II in the 7th to 6th centuries before our era. Already in the late period of Mesopotamian history, Nebuchadnezzar II, the last great Mesopotamian ruler, brought royal luxury to the maximum. He built the Hanging Gardens, according to legend, for his wife longing for the mountains of Media, fortified the walls of Babylon to such an extent that they withstood a siege lasting 13 years, and adorned the Ishtar Gate with glazed tiles in blue and golden colors. Archives say that daily up to 5 tons of bread, 3 tons of meat, and 200 barrels of beer arrived at his palace. But at the same time, he remained pious. In one inscription he writes, "I built the temple of Marduk not for my glory, but so that the god's heart may rejoice." This combination of unrestrained luxury and deep religious responsibility is a characteristic feature of mature Mesopotamian monarchy. But even the greatest empires are not eternal. By the 5th century before our era, the great Mesopotamian civilization gradually faded into the past. The reasons were complex. First, ecological degradation. Millennia of irrigation without drainage led to soil salinization. Barley yields fell twofold, and in some areas lands became unsuitable for agriculture. Second, political instability. After the fall of Babylon under the blows of the Persians, 539 years before our era, and then the Macedonians, 331 years before our era, traditional institutions, temples, schools of scribes, chancelleries lost support. Cuneiform was gradually displaced by the Aramaic alphabet, simpler and more convenient for everyday communication. The last known cuneiform tablet, recording a lunar eclipse, dates back to the 75th year of our era, almost 3,000 years after the first records in Uruk. But even then, in the Roman era, ancient rituals were still performed in the Temple of Marduk in Babylon. The civilization faded not from one blow, but from slow extinction, like a lamp running out of oil. And yet its light did not go out completely. Babylonian astronomical tables formed the basis of Greek astronomy. Ideas about the divine right of the king and justice entered the Bible, and the model of the city-state became the prototype for Phoenicia, Greece, and Italy. Thus, over more than 2,000 years, Mesopotamia remained the center of civilizational development. Its achievements, the city, writing, law, mathematics, astronomy, literature, architecture, were not isolated inventions, but parts of a single system in which religion, economy, power, and science interacted and supported each other. The people of Mesopotamia did not create civilization for abstract progress. They built it as a response to the challenges of nature and as a way to affirm their place in the world. Their legacy did not disappear. It entered the culture of Babylon and Assyria, influenced Jewish, Greek, and Persian traditions, and through them, all world history. And although the sands of centuries have buried their cities, the spirit of Mesopotamian civilization continues to live in every act of writing, in every division of the hour, in every code of laws, and in every human attempt to understand their place under the sun. Thank you for watching this video to the end. If you liked it, give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Good luck and see you in the next episode.